Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Welcome, Jade.
Hey.
So, I think I first met Jade Raymond in 2006 when she was demoing a game at E3. And it was this thing I had never heard of, or anybody else had heard of at the time. It was Assassin's Creed.
I remember that. It was very hot in that room, wasn't it?
Yeah. Just like 3 of us or so. But yeah.
Yeah, over 10 years ago.
Yeah.
12 years ago. Oh my God.
It's been a long time. But yeah, it's been interesting to see you sort of move into leadership in the games industry. And I kind of wonder, where did that start for you? Like, when did you start getting on a leadership track?
Well, I started in the industry as a programmer. I knew since I was 12
Like
that I wanted
12?
to be
Right, yeah.
In
Really
games,
young,
yeah.
yeah.
I started programming when I was 8, actually, and building robots. And then when I was playing a lot of games, and when it dawned on me that you could actually make games for a living, I just set my sights on it. And I never really thought much further than that. All I wanted to do was get a job in the game industry. So I didn't really think I was going to end up in a leadership role. I guess I thought I was hopefully going to get a job as a programmer, which I did. And I ended up moving into production somewhat reluctantly, but ultimately loved it because it's also a way to work with more people and have more of an impact on the games that are being made.
Are you surprised you're kind of a rarity in this? I don't know, you're kind of a unicorn here as far as having moved on this, this track from that programming sort of passion up into leading the development of games. In some ways, is this surprising? And what do you sort of think about sort of where women are in the game business now, too?
Yeah, actually, I'm really excited to lately be part of a lot more discussions on diversity and inclusion. It's obviously been a big focus for a lot of companies this year, and it's a big initiative for us at the studio. The studio that I'm building in Montreal called Motive. I think one of the really exciting things of building a studio from scratch is that you get to build that culture. And I really believe that it is by pulling together diverse teams that you get to create different kinds of game experiences. So it's something that's really at the core of what we're trying to do at Motive. And as part of that, I've had a chance to also reach out to a lot more schools. And recently we hosted a couple of Canadian ministers, the Minister of Innovation and the Minister of Job Development in our studios in Montreal. And we hosted a bunch of women from STEM backgrounds. And it was interesting to see. I'm not that much of a unicorn. We did find other women who have tech degrees leading different companies. And it was really great to have that discussion.
So, you've overcome struggles and challenges. What advice do you have then for people who want to get into the industry? Or
Yeah, advice for people getting into the industry?
Yeah.
So I think I get asked this question a lot, and my biggest piece of advice is to be really honest with yourself about what your passion is. People tend to still think that if they need to get a job in the game industry, they need to get a tech degree or need to focus on programming, but that's really not the case. We have, music composers. We have, Janina now was working with us on Battlefront and is in the game industry also. I think you guys would all agree. And there's so many different ways to be involved, and I think the way you're going to be successful is being true to yourself in terms of what excites you and what motivates you.
So you mentioned Battlefront, and there's an elephant in the room. In this case, it's not me. It is Battlefront 2 and loot boxes, I guess. Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, look, the team worked really hard on that game, and I've got to say, there were obviously some big learnings to take away. And the team at DICE has been continuing to work really hard. And EA is a learning company, so we are really focused on how we improve and obviously, don't make those kinds of same mistakes again. I think that's what I can say about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've built studios at 2 major publishing companies. I don't know who else has done something like that. But can you talk about the process of doing that and tell us what you've learned about building AAA studios?
Well, I mean, I feel really lucky to have a chance to build a second studio. The thing that I realized is actually a lot of what your studio can become is the first people that you bring in, and they really help shape the culture. And I realize, because it's not going to be because I wrote certain words or values on a piece of paper that's what the studio will become, even though, I might have a very clear vision. It really is who are the people who are part of the studio who are going to create that culture and really live the culture, and and then ultimately that's going to become the kinds of games that you ship and the kind of impact you can have on the team. So I think who is part of that initial startup group and also having a good process for how you kind of get the right mix of people so that you're laying the right foundation is really, really key. And I guess having a chance to do it a second time made that even more clear to me.
So what does AAA mean to you then, and how do you see it in the future?
Yeah, AAA, it's interesting. I think ultimately AAA is like a label that we gave to quality. And quality is really a subjective thing, right? But I think also when you look at what players want, what players call quality and what's being valued, it's changed tremendously in the last 2 years. I mean, it's evolved totally. If you look at, obviously, everyone's talking about PUBG and Fortnite these days, but we used to think AAA quality meant, how many features do you have? How many modes? How many hours of gameplay? How many maps? And really now, what players are valuing is what's the social connection? What impact can I have on this world? What's my own story that I can tell? So, all of that can happen in one map and one mode and very few features. So I think, just as player expectations, what players value changes, our definition of AAA and quality has to evolve as well.
You mentioned in a prep call we had something about a network model. Does that mean something?
Yeah, so I think, I was thinking about this because we're working on a brand new original IP out of the new studio. So we're thinking a lot about, how do we want to approach this and how is it different than, for example, the way we were thinking about things when we first met 12 years ago, or, I guess now it's almost 14 years ago that we started work on the first Assassin's Creed with that team. But the thinking on how to create a new franchise and a new brand has evolved a lot. What we were thinking then, actually, it's funny that Janina talked about transmedia as it's, we were actually thinking of transmedia then. We were thinking, with Assassin's Creed, how can we build a brand or a new brand that if we do make a hit, there's the potential for it to evolve and live on. And there's an infrastructure for new teams, professional teams, to take the brand and make it their own. And I think we've seen that worked with Assassins. As long as you pick a new period in time and you come up with a revisionist version of the history, it fits within the brand. And that was kind of the framework we put in place to empower other professional game teams to take the brand and live on and have it evolve. And I think how we're thinking about the brand now, which is differently, it's not just how do you create a brand that can live on and be refreshed with new professional game teams, but how do you create a brand that can actually be owned by the fans and players? And when I talk about the network model, it's not just owned by players and fans, but also the whole ecosystem of people who are involved in games these days. So, the broadcaster, the Twitch streamer, the content creator, the person who's going to be doing the mods, influencers, but journalists, all of these roles that we have in the game industry, they've evolved, right? It's not like here's the people who create the game and here are the people who play the game alone at home. Like all of these roles are all part of the ecosystem. So I think when you're thinking about creating something that really feels modern and fresh and can live on, it's like how can it live on through this broader ecosystem or network that we have, and games these days.
So, so you've gotten to the point where you're managing multiple studios at once. What is that like? And like, what kind of decision sort of floats up to you if you've got multiple studios under your?
Well, one thing it does is it makes you travel a lot more. I think every company has a little bit of a different take on what level of ownership and roles and responsibility are held at a project level versus a studio level versus a company level. And I think all of those things really also do define what kind of portfolio you can have, right? So if a company has a strong creative kind of central ownership, you will tend to see that the portfolio will be similar, right? And you can tell that the same people are commenting on games. If you have a company that really pushes the creativity down to the teams, you'll see a huge range of different types of games. And I think that's what's really exciting about the way we get to run things at EA is that the creativity is at the game level. Whether obviously if you look at EA Originals and those titles, you have FIFA, you have Battlefield, you have BioWare games. It's like hugely diverse, and so within working within that infrastructure, my role, it's more about how do you set up teams for success, make sure that best practices and the tech stacks are being shared, and that there's efficiency in terms of the way that we quantify what we need to do in the process, but that the creative decisions, the team and the creators and who are working on those things get to make them.
So if you think about AAA games in the future, what's sort of critically important to make them happen? What are users demanding? And what lives up to your own expectations?
It's a big question, Dean.
Way up high, way up high.
It's a lot in one. AAA games in the future. Look, I have huge, I always wanted to get into games, and I'm still so passionate about it because we do not have a formula for games yet. And the same thing that drives people crazy, that you look at what a game is and you never know, you can't define what it is what I love. And I'm so excited about all the things going on, but there's a lot of things that will continue to change the industry, and I think in a drastic way in the next few years. And one of those is cloud gaming and streaming. And I'm just gonna, from the creative perspective, there's just so many new possibilities in terms of how we reach people, what it means to the types of experiences we can create. If you think of back to the Assassin's Creed thing, that we're at that point, I think, going to the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360, which at that point was going to 8x the processing power in one generation. And that enabled game creators to think, okay, with all this processing power, what can I do differently from a gameplay perspective? And that's what enabled us to think, okay, we'll make this huge open world and climb everywhere, and anything you see you can get to. Now, if you think of the cloud, obviously you have still constraints in terms of cost and number of servers and stuff, but in terms of what you could do, you could decide to make a game, you could simulate the whole world and render everything in real physics. You could. You could forget about 100 and AI characters. You could have thousands. Forget about 100 players in a map. All of those servers can be in one location. You could have thousands or millions of players, and so because you don't have to if you're streaming the content and simulating it all in different server locations. So it's just, I think the first people to really take a bet and do something different there are going to have huge hit, and I think we're going to start to see things that just we never would have thought are possible. Then on the other side of things, I think just as a player and a gamer, I think we're about to see this complete revolution to the Netflix approach to gaming, and by that I don't mean I don't mean we're going to have a subscription service. That's not what I'm talking about. What I mean by that is, if you think of like when I was a kid, I wanted to watch a movie with my family. We went down to the video rental store. Probably some of you remember this. And you would go and you'd see these like lineups of the movies you could see, and maybe all of the ones you wanted to see, the copies were out, so you went back home and you're like sad, or you got something that you didn't want to see. And if you wanted to watch, like, for me, I'm aging myself here, but it's like the Cosby Show or whatever. You had to sit there, with your family at a certain time on Thursday. And the real revolution here is the convenience of if I have a certain amount of time, I get to watch it in that time where I am. I can download it on my, on my laptop, watch it on the plane or whatever. It fits to my schedule. And gaming right now doesn't quite do that, right? I think we'll all agree, like, we're getting there, we're taking steps, but it doesn't quite do that yet. And I think it's incredibly exciting because the future is not so far off where we are there, where there's not, where, it's just a matter of how much time do I have and what's the best way for me to connect to the experience that I want.
I had to completely disengage from Far Cry 5 in order to do this conference. So, it's like, wrong time for this game. But,
I don't know if I'll be able to help you with that one, though.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.